So let's start with the flight schedule. If you remember what I said in our Java class last Tuesday, was that I would prefer to keep the main method of our application very, very small, very high level. And that would include perhaps the main method of an application would create the flight schedule and communicate with the user, perhaps also using some other classes responsible for communication with the user, and essentially manipulate almost everything through the flight schedule. On those diagrams, I also indicate that because we need to be able to display reports out of our system once the data is entered, we say that, all right, we'd like to be able to show the flight, show departures, show arrivals, and things of that nature. Perhaps we could have also a separate class which is collection of these operations and name flight schedule reports. Because perhaps, when I look at the flight schedule, it's, for the most part for me right now, I'd like to focus to be able to do major manipulations of my objects in memory, such as add airline, add flight, update flight status, and things like that. Now the reporting pieces could be kept separate in a separate class. They could also be kept together, but it's essentially my decision here in this particular situation. This diagram was constructed with the Violet UML editor, so you can leverage that the same way when you're working on your semester project. So majority of these methods were derived from the description of the problem above this this diagram, right? We were saying that there should be a menu structure somewhere here, right? So we said, all right, there should be a menu structure in the application, set clock, add airline, add flight, so forth and so forth. All these major use cases that the user should be able to access in the system. So that's why that's where most of these were derived. So let's see if they actually make sense. Now this is sort of again maybe an incomplete list of things. For example, flight schedule and flight and airline and all others in this design should probably have a constructor. I'm not showing you constructors here at all because I'm assuming that they always should be there and you will be adding them. That's important in your project. Make sure that you do add constructors. But I'm not focusing on these constructors right now, and UML is very permissible in that department. It basically says show what you need. That's why it's a legit possibility to have multiple versions of the UML diagram that displays the same structure. And it also is a very likely possibility that you're not going to fit all of your classes in your application, especially if the application is non-trivial, to fit it on one diagram. It's okay to split your diagram into what we call components, right? For example, it's easy to observe that flight schedule in combination with flight, in combination with airline and some aircraft related data is basically a component here. Whereas, this part with the flight schedule reports could be a separate component because perhaps other useful classes could be associated with flight schedule reports, such as, for instance, database access, any database manipulation related, essentially any classes responsible for manipulation data that comes from the database, because we need to be able to do some additional manipulation with that data. We had also persistence layer with some sort of database or file storage. So this could be another component and could easily be moved out to a separate diagram. By the way, in what we're planning to do today also is that we're going to take What's missing here, what's definitely missing here, is no mentioning of user interface. And that's very important to say it right now, is that everything that you see here right now on this diagram, when we write code, when we design our system and when we write code, there should be no user communication except some non-trivial situation where we want to display something about an exception or some catastrophic error that we decided to show it in the middle of some of the work that these classes do. All user communication, management of what the user will see on screens is not part of what you see right now on screen. All of that I will have pushed out into a user menu. Again, perhaps a huge loop could be made and accommodated by our main application. But I really don't like to do that because there's still enough work to do at the high level in our main method. So it just makes sense to perhaps keep all the user choices, all keyboard and screen related communication with the user in at least one separate class, and I plan to talk about the user menu. So right now I am trying to forget about the communication with the user. I'm trying to assume that my communication with the user is already solved. So I already know how to communicate with the user and know exactly what I'm going to do with the keyboard and keyboard input and screen output and all that. So these operations and these classes have no user interaction. That's why we would like to perhaps refer to them as business objects. So flight, airline, aircraft, these are all good examples of business objects. If I wanted to have a specific screen, perhaps using graphical user interface, and screen specific to displaying information about an aircraft, right? I would have a separate user interface layer class, perhaps named aircraft screen or aircraft window or aircraft UI or something like that, completely separate from business objects. By the way, that doesn't mean that this UI class will not communicate with the business layer. It will, but all user interface related work will be done in separate classes. Okay, since we have a very simple user interface using console input output, perhaps I can survive by having just one class that will be dedicated to user interface. But later on about that. Let's just do a quick overview of these methods now, perhaps together with data attributes. So we mentioned already that flight schedule at the highest level has some system-wide settings such as current time, current day set by the user, has collection of airlines, and has collection of flights. We didn't discuss hash map just yet, but perhaps today we'll be using some examples of that. Now the methods, again, may not be a complete list of methods, but nevertheless it has set clock, delete all records, because we had that requirement. There should be an option for the user to clear all data structures and start fresh. Add airline, add flight, find out if so here's some helper methods which I also decided to add. We probably don't want to double book or create a duplicate flight, right? So for us to quickly facilitate this type of validation at the business layer, I added this method that says is existing flight number, and basically say, okay, does this flight already exist or not for this airline and this particular flight number? Yes, no. If it does exist, then I may be updating a record. If it doesn't exist, I may be creating a new record. If the user wanted to delete a flight or cancel a flight and that flight doesn't exist, then I will tell them, sorry, I couldn't find that flight, right? So this is very helpful to have something like this in the system that says, is this an existing flight number? So again, this is part of the schedule because perhaps the schedule knows best what's in those collections, so it can implement this particular method, which simply returns true or false, yes, no. Update flight status. As you know, the flights could be arrived, canceled, this, that, different statuses of our flights, so we can keep an eye on that as well. Get flight based on the flight number simply should return a flight object. By all means, again, this has nothing to do with user interface. This simply says, all right, I have a collection of flight objects. These objects are sitting somewhere in memory, and the flight schedule keeps track of them. So flight schedule, give me a particular flight object which can be identified by the external flight number. When I say external flight number, I think on this diagram, I refer to the airline code in concatenation with the flight number, like DL12345, right? So external identifier, although we know that DLD is the airline code and 12345 is a flight number within that particular airline.